Hello and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. In today's podcast, I wanted to share, actually I probably should tell you what number and all that stuff. So today's podcast is number 1429. You think I'd know what I'm doing by now. The topic is training and the title is Keeping Concepts in Perspective. So there were 3 conversations I had this week with different clients and also just a member of the gym. I thought they were kind of good topics, so I wanted to just discuss them as a podcast as a whole, and just kind of fun, like kind of touching on a more of a variety than a more specific based podcast. So one of the discussions came to the balance, or related to the balance of training and nutrition, and that they need to have equal attention. I had someone tell me this week that, they're willing to do anything and they will, become their best. However, they were more so meant training. They were like, you tell me how often I should train and I'll train. You tell me what exercises I should do and I'll do it. And, they were all into it. It was 100%. But immediately when I asked, I said, well, we've talked a lot about training. I said, well, what does your food look like? And they're like, well, like I eat. And I was like, good. I'm glad you're alive. But what do you eat? And let's go into it a little bit more. And they sometimes have breakfast, sometimes not. They sometimes would have a big lunch, sometimes they'd have a quick lunch, and it was, probably way less than half the calories sometimes as their normal lunch. And then they said they always had dinner and they always had a casein protein shake before they went to bed. So they were super dedicated in their mind with the casein protein, which is very slow digesting protein. Typically it tastes like crap, but it's slow digesting. The idea of that is that it'll digest slowly throughout the night and give you more of a sustained protein release into your bloodstream to help with muscle, development. Whether that's, cleaning away damaged muscle tissue and building new tissue, or just repairing the existing tissue, that kind of stuff. So it's good for maintenance and muscle growth. They also then said that they always take a pre-workout, they always drink BCAAs during their workout, and after the workout they always get a protein shake in. So in their mind, it was like their training was super detailed, the nuances out the wazoo. They were talking about different different hand placements in different ways to front rack a barbell when they front squat. So we were talking about that. We were something that detailed. They were then telling me all the supplements. They tried pre-workouts that were hyper energy, but they said it made them feel too chaotic. So they like the hyper focused kind of pre-workouts. Then the BCAAs, the post-workout protein drink, the casein. They were talking about all this stuff, but then, breakfast, sometimes yes, sometimes no. Lunch, hit or miss. Sometimes they go out to eat, at they have a couple restaurants nearby where they work. So sometimes they'll go to the restaurant, eat like a 1,200 calorie, lunch. Other times they're super fast. They just have like a protein bar, which might be 300, 400 calories at most. Then they'll always have dinner, as they said. But the dinner was, sometimes they said if they're behind in training, they would have pizza because it has higher calories. But it has low protein. It has low protein for the amount of calories you get. And then they said other times they'll do like steak and rice or chicken and rice. Those are not equal. Typically most steaks will have a lot more calories per weight unit of meat compared to chicken. Chicken breast is very lean. Steak is not. So you might have 8 ounces of chicken and 8 ounces of steak. Those are not the same thing. Not at all. Steak has way more calories per 8 ounces than chicken does. So their nutritional understanding, not good. But supplement knowledge, pretty good. Training details, they actually were very intelligent about training. And they knew a lot of like small nuances, which was exciting and fun to kind of talk about. Now, what was interesting is they were so just disinterested, it seemed like, in the nutrition part. They really loved talking about training. They liked analyzing supplements. And then whenever I started saying, well, what, maybe for breakfast you could do, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, well, I don't know. I kind of get up late sometimes and, I don't always have time in the morning. And I'm like, you're kidding me. You're dedicated enough to go research and learn all that you know about supplements and supplements and training. But you won't get up 10 minutes earlier every day to make sure you can get breakfast. It's enormous disconnect between the two. And this is an extreme case, but it's actually not as extreme as most people might think. I run across this all the time. That people either have more effort and energy and focus invested in nutrition than they do in training, or vice versa. So we want to make sure that whatever efforts you're putting into like exercise and training, you want to have equal amount of focus on your nutrition and vice versa. The reason why is training, all it does is it creates an environment in which your body has to adapt and respond to. So maybe you do strength-based training. So you want the adaptation your body to make to be strength. Or maybe you do, muscle building, muscle developing style training. And you want the response your body to make would be muscle development. Maybe you do cardiovascular endurance, blah, 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 blah. Whatever it is you might do, you want your body to make those adaptations. When you're in the gym, you're not really making those adaptations. Really, the one thing you could do in the gym for sure, and you have to do in the gym, is improve technique. Now, they've done mind kind of experiments where somebody will kind of mentally play out technique elements in their mind. And they did I talked about like Michael Phelps in the Olympics and Olympic lifters and like Olympic lifting athletes. If they mentally think of their technique, they can actually make technical improvement in regards to awareness to technique concepts. But in general, you have to be in the gym to kind of practice and build your technique. But pretty much everything else about being in the gym happens outside of the gym. When you want your body to make the neural adaptations for strength, when you want your body to make the muscular adaptations for bigger muscles or better shape to your muscles or more endurance to the muscles, all that stuff, you're creating the environment for change. You're creating a stimulus to ask the body to make those changes. And then how you sleep and how you eat, how well you recover, actually is when your body kind of makes those changes. So it's through food that your body makes those changes. It's through sleep that your body makes those changes. Muscle tissue is made of protein. If you do not eat enough protein, you do not have muscle tissue. You go into the gym, you tear the muscle tissue apart. If you don't put enough protein back in, it doesn't even grow back to what it was, let alone adding new tissue. So that's one thing that I see people not always keeping in perspective, is that nutrition and training need to be considered equal, and you need to give equal attention to both. Okay? So if you want greater progress, analyze your nutrition as much as you analyze your training. Now, we have podcast 1232. Good podcast to start with if you're new to kind of controlling your nutrition. Just take the steps all the way through, and it'll basically take you to what I do with my most advanced people, just from beginner to advanced. So it'll take you through all those steps. Now, we also have the second concept here is balancing perfect form with adaptation producing stimulus. What this means is I want to lift cleanly enough and with good technique that the desired muscles are being targeted maximally without other muscles kind of taking over. But the key word there is maximally. So I had another client sent me a video where this guy in a TikTok video was talking about, the importance of using lighter weight loads in order to get maximal muscular contraction. Unfortunately, it's, anytime you watch any videos, I don't know what the time limit is for TikTok videos, but often when trying to teach something, it's challenging to keep everything in perspective. So he was doing a good job of kind of pointing out that a weight that you can lift under control allows you to better maximally recruit muscle fibers in the desired muscles that you actually want to train. The way that I wish he would have kind of pointed out was if you lift aggressively and you're kind of swinging a lot, you're using a lot of momentum, and this will be in exercises that you want to specifically develop the muscle tissue. You want to be very slow and very controlled. When you're doing like a heavy squat, a heavy deadlift, like Olympic lifting, you're going to use momentum. I hope you do. So it's helpful. But when you're talking about movements for maximal muscle growth or maximal muscle stimulus in regards to like shaping and things like that, you do want to be very pinpointed in regards to making sure you maximally contract the targeted muscle and trying to eliminate other muscles helping out when they shouldn't be. So some of your muscles should be stabilizing you and some of the muscles should be moving the weight. So in the video, he was discussing the benefits of using lighter weights, ensuring that you can feel the muscle contract. So he gave an example of a bicep curl. Now, that's a pretty muscular dude. Not like a professional bodybuilder looking kind of guy, but he's very muscular, looked good, good shape. You can tell he lifted weights. So he was showing the curl with a bicep curl with a 15-pound dumbbell. Now, he had biceps that were built with hell of a lot bigger than 15-pound dumbbells. But he was showing how, if you do a bicep contraction with a 15-pound dumbbell and you maximally squeeze at the very top, that you will get more muscle fibers involved into that contraction by maximally squeezing and flexing at the top. The downside is it was too light of a weight. So if somebody looks at that video and they're going to say, well, okay, if I only use 5 or 10-pound dumbbells, I can maximally squeeze and flex my muscles. Sure, I can use no dumbbell and I can maximally sit here and just make a big muscle and flex, right? Now, if I just sit here and flex and flex and flex and flex, then I'm not going to create any muscle damage. Therefore, I'm not going to get any bigger muscles. So you can't just sit at home and do, flexing each individual muscle and turn into a bodybuilder. Why? Because flexing against nothing creates nothing. It doesn't create muscle damage, which then your body would repair by building thicker, denser tissue to protect that tissue from being damaged again. So, too light of a weight, and sure, I can contract every muscle fiber I want, but I'm not creating any damage. Too heavy of a weight, and I'm just going to be throwing the thing around. I'm using a lot of momentum, a lot of other muscles, and I'm not getting maximal recruitment. So even though the weight is heavy and it has the potential to tear my muscles, if I'm not using, like in a good way, like micro damage that creates bigger growth. So if it has the potential to create that positive, damage to the tissue that we want, but I'm using every other muscle to do the movement and there's a lot of momentum involved, well, it's heavy enough, but there's not enough control. So there's a balance. I want to have stuff that that is weight load challenging to stress the tissues, but I also wanted to make sure that I can control the movement and make sure the targeted muscle is maximally recruited. So there is a balance between those things. It's trying to find, okay, what weight can I do slow and controlled and really feel the desired muscle working, but heavy enough that the desired muscle fails. It either reaches like a maximal pump or it just physically can't lift the weight anymore within the desired rep range or the desired time under tension that I want. So what I typically do is I have in my own training and with clients is I usually do the first couple working sets. So if I have 3 working sets of an exercise, the first one I'm probably going to err on the side of maybe being a little too light but really awesome control. I'm trying to pick perfectly. I want to have I want to be perfect with picking the exact right weight but having the most amount of control I can. So that would be ideal. However, we know that that's really hard to do. So if on the first set I err a little bit on being a little light and I can do maximal quality, I like that. I think that's a good one to do. I would try to pick perfectly, but if I was unsure if the weight was heavy enough or not, I would go on the little bit of a lighter choice. Then the second set, if it ended up being a little too light, I'd make it heavier. If it ended up being the right weight, I would leave it where it was. Then the third set, I would say, okay, now's the time where I can kind of push myself a little bit. If a little bit of other muscles get involved, oh well. But I'll go ahead and try that little bit heavier weight, or I'll try those extra couple reps. But that's how I tend to do it, is from my first working sets, if I'm uncertain, I err on the side of being too light. On my latter working sets, if I'm uncertain, I err on the side of being a little heavy, and then I walk away. So that's a good way to kind of balance and blend, whether or not you think you're doing it too light or too heavy. Go to a weight where you're like, I'm kind of not sure if I should do this one or this one. Not sure if I should do 40 or 45. Well, on the first working sets, err on 40. On the second working sets, the later working sets, err on 45. Right? Pretty good mixture there. The last thing we want to look at is something I'm going to probably dive into a little bit deeper in an upcoming podcast. But I was talking with a guy who does Olympic lifting, and his technique is freaking flawless. So I was watching him while my wife and I were working out at the gym, and he was doing some squatting, squat variations and whatnot. And he seemed to kind of struggling grind through a couple heavy lifts, but while he was grinding, he stayed in perfect position, even shifted harder into his heels, pushed harder back into the bar. I mean, it was an absolute perfect way to struggle with a lift. So I asked him, I was like, dude, congratulations, that technique is amazing. And he seemed kind of bummed, and I was like, oh, what's up? And he's like, well, I ran this, I think it was like an 8-week or 12-week program, and he said I didn't really get any strength out of it, So he was telling me it was from such and such company, and it was a pre-written program that you can just kind of buy, I guess, for Olympic lifters to gain strength. The problem is the program was high volume based rather than physical damage based. What this means is the person who wrote the programming assumes that if the person they wrote it for just practices squat more, that they'll get better at squatting and they'll hit a PR. The downside is this person was already so proficient and so clean in their technique, they needed more physical damage work than just volume-based work. Now, what in the world am I talking about? So, when you want to get stronger, there's 3 basic categories of things you can look at. Is technical proficiency. If I get better with my technique, I can then display the strength I have better, and all of a sudden I can, get a PR. I can improve my physical strength, just brute force strength, and then that makes me physically stronger. Now, of course, I'd want to refine that technique and then all of a sudden be better later on too. But you have technique proficiency. The better technique you get, the more weight you can display. You can move around with the strength you have. Then there's just physical strength. And then mental strength. Some people don't have the mental strength to do heavy weights, so they have to kind of get over not feeling confident, get over feeling kind of anxious, and just kind of have a better mindset approach towards heavier weights. So those are 3 categories to kind of look into when you say, okay, I want to progress in strength. Well, if it's a brand new exercise to you, the more you repeat it, the better you'll get at technique. And then all of a sudden you can better display the strength you have. So when somebody's new to, say, squatting, their first workout, they're almost never, even if they go, quote-unquote, full send, they're almost never going to actually display the peak amount of their strength. What they're displaying is the best that their technique can show of their strength. So the more you have them squat, the better their technique gets, the more of their strength they can display. So just volume, just getting somebody to squat, that helps improve technique. That helps them display more of their current strength. Does it build some physical strength? Sure. But it's more so going to have a benefit due to technique improvement. This is why squat everyday programs tend to lead to a little bit of a PR for pretty much anybody, because almost anybody already doesn't squat every day. So therefore, the higher frequency allows them to feel more kind of in tune with their technique. And then they can all of a sudden display greater levels of strength. But it's not necessarily a lot of physical development as much as it is just their technique got better, therefore they can lift more. So for this person, the challenge for them was they had bought a program unknowingly about the balance of all this. And they thought, well, if I follow a program, I'll get stronger. Their technique was already so good that the program didn't have enough heavy weight loads in it to really produce significant amount of physical damage. And I think the program was only 8 weeks, which is not a lot of time for physical strength development. Not a lot at all. So it wasn't a surprise to me when they didn't get much of an increase from it. So what we were talking about was then that they needed something that was more physical strength development based. So, for example, they might be able to low bar back squat for, say 4 to 8 weeks. Then they might do heavy front squats for 4 to 8 weeks. And then they might try one of their Olympic lifts. So they're using heavier weight-loaded movements to produce more just raw power, raw strength. And then they're going to refine their technique along the way, kind of get back into their technique. And then that would help them get stronger. So it's interesting in the sense that, unfortunately, a lot of programs that are written nowadays are written, and if they're sold for like mass population, like here's our, Olympic lifting strength development program. It's the same thing that they're selling to anybody else that buys it. They're assuming that most people just need more practice with the movement. The more they practice, the better their technique will get. Even if they have relatively light weight loads, you're going to get technique improvement, and then all of a sudden they'll be able to better display strength at the end of the program. It's harder to get somebody to do physical strength development because you have to push them harder with percentages and intensities within the program, and that leads to greater potential of risk if you're not watching the quality of their technique or you don't know what the quality of their technique is. They also, if their nutrition isn't on point, they're more prone to having aches and annoyances and low energy. So writing a program that's more technique development, high volume based, but lower intensity is a great way to sell a program, but it's not the best, and actually it's even worse for people who are already really good. So the better you get at whatever you do, the more and more, the greater the need of individualized programming. So it's challenging whenever you already have good technique to then use a mass program, because most mass programs rely on technique improvement to be the driver of why that program works. So, thought this was kind of neat stuff. Maybe it was fun just to kind of hear some recent discussions I got into. If you have any questions about any of this along the way, let me know. So, a podcast for nutrition that we talked about was 1,232. It's a nutrition podcast titled Start Here. Podcast for balancing perfect form and all that stuff. Podcast 220, which is a training podcast titled Muscle Intention versus Movement Intention. And then for technique versus strength development, I don't have a great podcast on that yet, so let me make one. But if you guys have any questions or you want to follow up with any information, always feel welcome to reach out. I enjoy talking to everybody. So thank you for listening. Let me know if you need anything. Our email is brutalirongym@gmail.com. If you like today's podcast or the podcast in general, please consider sharing it. The more people we share it with, the more people we can help. Thank you to the patrons of the podcast, the people who financially support the podcast. The podcast is well over $1,000 a year for hosting costs. I give an hour to it every single day, and I want to keep it for free. So thank you for the donations that help kind of cover some of that cost, so that way it makes more business sense to keep this thing going. You can give a donation at our website, www.brutalirongym.com. There's an option for a one-time donation, monthly donation, yearly donation. Anything you can give is greatly appreciated. If you like the information we share in our podcast, you can find more from us on our social media channels on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. If you have any questions, feedback, suggestions, anything you want to know, let us know at our email, brutalirongym@gmail.com. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.